Blood in the water, a kayak torn in half, a man screaming for help as something massive circles beneath him. "Help me! Oh God, help me!" Larry Reyns was supposed to be enjoying the vacation of a lifetime. Instead, he was fighting for his life against one of nature's most feared predators. What started as a peaceful morning paddle turned into a nightmare that would change everything. This wasn't just bad luck. This was a reminder that when we enter the ocean, we become part of the food chain, and sometimes we're not at the top. The water turned crimson, the screams echoed across the bay, and Larry Reyns discovered that some encounters leave scars that never heal. Chapter 1. The Dreamer. Larry Reyns had been planning this trip for 3 years. At 42, he was a high school math teacher from Colorado who lived for his summers. While his colleagues took cruise ships or resort vacations, Larry craved adventure. He wanted to feel alive, to push boundaries, to create stories worth telling. His passion was sea kayaking. Every weekend, he drove hours to mountain lakes, perfecting his technique. He studied ocean currents, weather patterns, and marine life. His garage was filled with gear, paddles, dry suits, emergency beacons, and maps of coastlines he dreamed of exploring. "This is the year," he told his wife Margaret over breakfast that spring morning. "I'm finally going to paddle the Pacific coast." Margaret worried. She always did. 20 years of marriage had taught her to recognize that look in Larry's eyes. The same look he had before he climbed his first mountain, before he learned to rock climb, before he took up whitewater rafting. "Promise me you'll be careful," she said, squeezing his hand. "Always am," he replied, though they both knew that wasn't entirely true. Larry had grown up in landlocked Nebraska, the son of a grain farmer who never understood his boy's restless spirit. While other folks were content with church socials and county fairs, Larry dreamed of horizons beyond wheat fields. His bedroom walls were covered with National Geographic photos of distant coastlines, and he fell asleep to recordings of ocean waves he had borrowed from the local library. His first taste of real adventure came during college, when he spent a summer working at a mountain lodge in Colorado. The job paid little, but it offered something priceless: access to wilderness that stretched beyond imagination. He learned to hike, then to climb, then to push himself into increasingly remote places where few people ventured. Teaching had been a practical choice, but Larry made it work for his adventurous spirit. Summers off meant time for expeditions. Spring breaks meant weekend getaways. Even during the school year, he spent every free moment planning his next adventure, researching gear and studying maps. The ocean called to him in a way that mountains never could. He devoured documentaries about marine life, read every book about sea kayaking he could find. He joined online forums where experienced paddlers shared routes and warnings about currents, weather, and wildlife. His transformation from landlubber to serious sea kayaker had taken years. He started with lessons at a local reservoir, learning the basics of paddle strokes and water safety. Then came weekend trips to mountain lakes, building his skills and confidence. He practiced rescue techniques until they became second nature, learned to read weather patterns, and studied navigation. Margaret had been skeptical at first. "You're 40 years old," she had said when he announced his intention to learn sea kayaking. "Maybe it's time to find a safer hobby." But she came to understand that this wasn't just a hobby for Larry. It was a calling, a way of connecting with something larger than himself. She had seen how peaceful he became after a day on the water, how the stress of teaching seemed to wash away with each paddle stroke. The California coast was his holy grail. Specifically, the waters near Mendocino, where rugged cliffs met pristine bays. He had studied satellite images for hours, read trip reports from other paddlers, and contacted local outfitters for advice. Everything pointed to August as the perfect time: calm seas, clear skies, and optimal conditions for a solo expedition. His friends thought he was crazy. "Why not just go to the beach like normal people?" his colleague Jim asked during a faculty meeting. "Sit in a chair, read a book, maybe swim a little." But Larry wasn't normal people. He needed the solitude, the challenge, the raw connection with nature that only came from being alone on the open water. He needed to test himself against something real, something that couldn't be graded or scheduled or controlled. The night before his departure, Larry packed his gear with the precision of a surgeon. His kayak was a 17-foot sea kayak, bright yellow for visibility. He had a GPS device, a marine radio, flares, and enough food for 5 days. His route was plotted, his weather window confirmed, his emergency contacts notified. He had spent weeks preparing physically, swimming laps at the community pool and hiking with a weighted pack. His gear had been tested and retested. He had studied charts of the area until he could navigate them in his sleep. "I'll call you every evening," he promised Margaret as he loaded his truck. The kayak was strapped securely to the roof, his gear packed in waterproof bags. She hugged him tightly, breathing in the familiar scent of his adventure preparations. Waterproofing spray, sunscreen, and the subtle smell of excitement that always accompanied his departures. "Just come home to me," she whispered, a phrase that had become their ritual. "Always do," he replied, kissing her forehead. As Larry drove toward the coast, he felt the familiar surge of excitement building in his chest. The mountains gave way to rolling hills, then to redwood forests, and finally to the smell of salt air. This was his element, his escape from the classroom and the routine of everyday life. He stopped at a roadside overlook as the Pacific Ocean came into view for the first time. The water stretched endlessly toward the horizon, deep blue and mysterious. Waves crashed against rocky shores far below, sending up plumes of white spray. "This is it," he said to himself, feeling the same sense of awe that always came when he encountered true wilderness. He had no idea that within 48 hours, his life would be changed forever. Chapter 2. Paradise Found. The morning of August 15th dawned perfect. Larry stood on the rocky shore of Mendocino Bay, breathing in the crisp ocean air. The water was glass smooth, reflecting the golden sunrise like a mirror. Seals played in the distance, their barks echoing off the cliffs. He had arrived the previous evening, camping at a secluded spot overlooking the bay. Sleep had been fitful, not from nerves, but from excitement. He was finally here, finally living the dream he had cultivated for years. His yellow kayak looked small against the vast expanse of blue. Larry performed his pre-launch routine with practiced precision, checking his gear, testing his radio, reviewing his route one final time. The plan was simple: paddle north along the coast, explore hidden coves, and return by evening. "Beautiful morning for it," called out a voice behind him. Larry turned to see an elderly fisherman preparing his own boat nearby. The man had weathered skin and knowing eyes. "Best conditions I've seen all summer," Larry replied. "Perfect for kayaking." The fisherman nodded, then paused. "You going out alone?" "Just me in the ocean," Larry said with a grin. "Well, stay close to shore. Been seeing more wildlife lately. Big stuff." Larry thanked him and returned to his preparations. Wildlife was part of the appeal. He hoped to see whales, dolphins, maybe even sea otters. His camera was waterproofed and ready. At 7:30, he pushed off from the rocky beach. The kayak sliced through the calm water with satisfying ease. Each paddle stroke carried him further from land, further into the world he had dreamed of exploring. The coastline was breathtaking. Towering cliffs rose from the water, topped with wind-sculpted pines. Hidden beaches nestled between rocky outcroppings. The water was so clear he could see kelp forests swaying far below. Larry felt alive in a way that only came from being completely present in the moment. No lesson plans, no staff meetings, no traffic jams. Just him, his kayak, and the endless blue. He paddled for 2 hours, making good time along the coast. The sun climbed higher, warming his shoulders. A pod of dolphins appeared, racing alongside his kayak for several minutes before disappearing into the depths. Around 10 o'clock, he reached a protected cove that looked perfect for a rest. Larry beached his kayak on a small strip of sand and stretched his legs. He ate an energy bar and checked his GPS. Right on schedule. The water in the cove was incredibly clear. Schools of fish moved like silver clouds below the surface. Larry watched them with fascination, marveling at their synchronized movements. He didn't notice the shadow that had begun following him from deeper water. Didn't see the massive form that tracked his bright yellow kayak from below. After 30 minutes, Larry pushed off again. The return journey would take him further from shore, across the mouth of the bay. It was the most exposed part of his route, but the conditions were perfect. As he paddled into deeper water, Larry felt a profound sense of peace. This was why he did this. This was why he needed the ocean. He had no idea that beneath him, something enormous was rising from the depths. Chapter 3: Terror from the Deep. The first strike came without warning. Larry was paddling steadily across the mouth of the bay when his kayak suddenly lurched sideways. The impact was so violent it nearly threw him from his seat. Water exploded around him as something massive breached the surface. Time slowed. Larry caught a glimpse of gray skin, a white belly, rows of serrated teeth. A great white shark, longer than his kayak, hung in the air for a split second before crashing back into the water. "Oh my God," Larry whispered, his hands frozen on his paddle. The shark disappeared beneath the surface, leaving only ripples and Larry's thundering heartbeat. He scanned the water frantically, but saw nothing. The ocean had returned to its deceptive calm. Larry's mind raced through everything he had read about great white sharks. They were ambush predators, striking from below with explosive power. They could reach speeds of 25 miles per hour underwater. Their bite force exceeded 4,000 pounds per square inch. More importantly, they were intelligent. They tested their prey, investigated unusual objects in their territory. Larry's bright yellow kayak would appear as foreign and potentially threatening to a creature that ruled these waters. He tried to remember the protocols. Don't panic. Stay calm. Paddle slowly toward shore. Don't splash. Don't make sudden movements that might trigger another investigation. Larry began to paddle, each stroke deliberate and controlled. The shore looked impossibly far away, at least half a mile of open water between him and safety. The depth beneath him was unknown, but he guessed it was at least 60 feet, plenty of room for a massive predator to maneuver. His heart hammered against his ribs as he scanned the water around him. The surface remained calm, but he knew that meant nothing. Sharks were perfectly adapted for stealth, capable of approaching from directly below without creating any surface disturbance. Every shadow beneath the water made him flinch. Every piece of floating kelp looked like a dorsal fin. His imagination filled the blue void beneath him with lurking death, circling just out of sight. The second attack was devastating. The shark came from below, its massive head breaching the surface directly beneath Larry's kayak. The impact lifted boat and paddler completely out of the water. Larry felt himself flying through the air, spinning helplessly, then crashing down hard into the churning sea. When he surfaced, gasping and disoriented, his kayak was gone. In its place floated pieces of yellow fiberglass and scattered gear. His paddle was snapped in half, the carbon fiber shaft jutting from the water like a broken bone. His GPS beeped frantically from 20 feet away, its waterproof case keeping it afloat even as its owner faced mortal danger. "Help!" Larry screamed, though no one could hear him. The nearest fishing boats were miles away, the shore populated only by seals and seabirds. "Somebody help me!" The shark circled him now, its dorsal fin cutting through the water like a knife blade. Larry could see its bulk beneath the surface, longer than a car, built for killing. Its movements were deliberate, methodical. This wasn't random aggression. This was assessment. Larry tried to remember everything he had read about shark attacks. Play dead, fight back, swim away. The advice contradicted itself. Useless now that he faced the reality of those teeth, that power, that ancient intelligence focused entirely on him. The creature was enormous, easily 16 feet long and weighing well over 2 tons. Its head alone was the size of a small boat, its jaws capable of biting a seal in half. Larry felt like a minnow in a pond, completely outmatched by a predator that had perfected its killing techniques over millions of years. The shark rushed him again, and this time Larry felt the sandpaper skin scrape against his leg. The denticles that covered the shark's hide were like tiny teeth themselves, designed to reduce drag as the creature moved through water. Against human skin, they were devastating, stripping away flesh with the slightest contact. Larry kicked frantically, his foot connecting with something solid. The shark veered away, but not far. It was testing him now, learning about this strange creature that had invaded its territory. Blood clouded the water around him. His wetsuit was torn along his leg, the neoprene shredded like paper. The shark had marked him, and now it was assessing its prey with the patience of a perfect predator. Larry looked toward shore, calculating distances and odds. Half a mile, maybe more. He was a strong swimmer, had trained for exactly this kind of emergency, but not with injuries, Not with a predator stalking him. Not with blood in the water calling to every dangerous creature in the area. The shark attacked again, its jaws closing around Larry's left arm with hydraulic force. He felt the pressure first, then the grinding of teeth through neoprene and flesh. The pain was indescribable, white-hot and all-consuming. He punched at the shark's snout with his free hand, screaming underwater as bubbles erupted around him. The shark released him and backed away. But Larry knew it wasn't finished. This was how they hunted. Test bites, assess the prey, wait for weakness. The next attack would likely be fatal. Larry's arm hung useless at his side, blood streaming from multiple puncture wounds. His strength was fading rapidly, but his will to survive burned brighter than ever. He thought of Margaret, of the promise he had made to come home. He thought of his students, his unfinished lesson plans, the life he wasn't ready to give up. The shark came at him one final time, and Larry did the only thing he could think of. He swam straight at it, yelling as loud as his lungs would allow, punching and kicking with everything he had left. The collision was brutal. Teeth found flesh. Water turned red. But something in Larry's desperate fury gave the shark pause. Perhaps it was confusion at prey that fought back so aggressively. Perhaps it was simply satisfied with its investigation. The great white backed away, circling but not attacking, its black eyes studying this strange creature that refused to behave like normal prey. Larry didn't wait to find out what the shark would decide. He began swimming toward shore with whatever strength remained, expecting at any moment to feel those jaws close around him again. Behind him, the shark watched and waited, but did not follow. The encounter was over, but the price had been paid in blood and terror that would haunt Larry for the rest of his life. Chapter 4. Race Against Time. The sound of a boat engine cut through Larry's fading consciousness. He had been floating for what felt like hours, using his good arm to stay afloat while blood continued to seep from his wounds. The shore still looked impossibly distant. There, in the water, the voice carried across the waves like a lifeline. Larry tried to wave, but his arm wouldn't respond. He attempted to shout, but managed only a hoarse whisper. The boat changed course, heading directly toward him. Captain Mike Torres had been fishing the Outer Banks when he spotted the debris field. Pieces of yellow kayak, a broken paddle, and scattered gear floating on the surface. His first thought was accident. His second thought was shark. "Holy hell," Mike muttered as he pulled alongside Larry's floating form. The water around the man was stained pink with blood. "This is Coast Guard Channel 16. We have a medical emergency. Man in the water, multiple injuries, possible shark attack." Larry's eyes fluttered open as strong hands pulled him from the water. Through his haze, he saw a bearded man in a fishing cap, his face grim with concern. "Stay with me, buddy," Mike said, wrapping Larry in emergency blankets. "What's your name?" "Larry," he managed. "Larry Reyns." "Okay, Larry, you're going to be fine. Coast Guard helicopter is on the way." But Mike wasn't sure that was true. Larry's left arm was mangled, deep puncture wounds visible through the torn wetsuit. His leg showed similar damage. Blood loss was severe, and shock was setting in. "My wife," Larry whispered. "Margaret. Need to call Margaret." "We'll take care of that," Mike assured him, though his priority was keeping Larry conscious. "Tell me about Margaret. How long have you been married?" 20 years, Larry said, his voice growing weaker. "She told me to be careful." Mike kept Larry talking while his boat raced toward shore. In the distance, the distinctive whop-whop-whop of helicopter rotors grew louder. The Coast Guard was fast, but would they be fast enough? Larry drifted in and out of consciousness. He saw Margaret's face, remembered their last conversation. He thought about his students, wondered if they would hear about this, wondered if it would make them afraid of the ocean he had learned to love. The helicopter appeared overhead, its rescue basket descending toward the boat. Paramedic Janet Rodriguez rappelled down first, her medical bag already open. "What do we have?" she called out. "Shark attack victim," Mike replied. "Multiple lacerations, severe blood loss, been in the water about an hour." Janet began her assessment immediately. Larry's pulse was weak but steady. His breathing was shallow. The arm wounds were deep, possibly severing tendons. The leg wounds were less severe but still serious. "We need to get him to trauma now," she announced. The basket lift to the helicopter was a blur of motion and medical equipment. Larry felt himself rising above the water, above the boat, above the bay where his peaceful morning had turned into a nightmare. Through the helicopter's window, he could see the ocean stretching endlessly toward the horizon. Beautiful and terrible, peaceful and violent. He had entered its domain and learned a lesson he would never forget. The helicopter banked toward the mainland, racing against time and blood loss. In the distance, Larry could see the ambulance already waiting at the landing zone. Margaret would be getting a phone call soon. The phone call every adventure seeker's family dreads. As the helicopter flew over the coastline, Larry closed his eyes and held on to the one thought that mattered. He was still alive. Chapter 5. Fighting for Life. The trauma bay at Mendocino Coast District Hospital erupted into controlled chaos as Larry Reyns was wheeled through the doors. Dr. Amanda Foster, the lead trauma surgeon, had been alerted about the shark attack and assembled her team within minutes of the Coast Guard's radio call. Male, early 40s, multiple shark bite wounds to left arm and leg, paramedic Janet Rodriguez reported rapidly. Severe blood loss, vitals dropping, in and out of consciousness. Dr. Foster took one look at Larry's mangled arm and knew they were racing against time. The shark's teeth had crushed bones, severed tendons, and torn through muscle tissue. The wounds were unlike anything she had treated before. "Get me 6 units of blood stat," she ordered, "and call orthopedics. We're going to need reconstruction." Larry's eyes fluttered open as the medical team worked around him. Bright lights, urgent voices, the smell of antiseptic. He tried to speak, but a mask covered his face. "Mr. Reyns, can you hear me?" Dr. Foster leaned over him. "You're in the hospital. We're going to take good care of you." Through the fog of pain medication, Larry managed to nod. His left arm felt like it was on fire, but somehow distant, as if it belonged to someone else. "Margaret," he whispered behind the mask. "Your wife is on her way," Dr. Foster assured him. "She'll be here soon." What Dr. Foster didn't tell him was that Margaret had collapsed when she received the phone call. She was driving from Colorado with Larry's brother, both of them terrified of what they might find. In the operating room, Dr. Foster surveyed the damage. The shark's teeth had left a pattern of puncture wounds that would require multiple surgeries to repair. Several bones in Larry's arm were shattered. The ulnar nerve was severed, meaning he might never regain full use of his hand. "This is going to be a long night," she told her team. The surgery lasted 7 hours. Dr. Foster worked methodically, cleaning debris from the wounds, repairing what could be saved, and preparing for the lengthy reconstruction process that would follow. Larry's leg wounds were less severe but still required extensive work. The shark's teeth had left deep lacerations that would heal but would always serve as reminders of those terrifying moments in the water. When Margaret finally arrived at the hospital, Larry was in intensive care, unconscious but stable. She sat beside his bed, holding his undamaged hand, trying to process what had happened. "He's always been so careful," she told the nurse. "So prepared. This wasn't supposed to happen." But it had happened. And now they faced a new reality together. Dr. Foster met with Margaret the next morning to discuss Larry's prognosis. The conversation was difficult but necessary. "He's going to live," she began, "but the damage to his arm is extensive. We've repaired what we can, but he's going to face a long recovery, physical therapy, possibly multiple additional surgeries." "Will he be able to use his arm again?" Margaret asked. "Some function will return," Dr. Foster said carefully, "but it will never be the same. The nerve damage is permanent. He'll have limited mobility in his hand, reduced strength in his arm." Margaret nodded, fighting back tears. Larry was alive. Everything else could be dealt with. When Larry woke up 3 days later, the first thing he saw was Margaret's face. She was smiling through her tears, holding his good hand. "Welcome back," she whispered. Larry tried to move his left arm and felt nothing. Panic flashed in his eyes. "It's okay," Margaret said quickly. "The doctors explained everything. You're going to be fine." But Larry could see the truth in her eyes. Nothing would ever be fine again. The ocean had claimed its price, and he would carry the cost for the rest of his life. Outside his window, he could hear the distant sound of waves crashing against the shore. The ocean continued its eternal rhythm, indifferent to the human drama playing out in the hospital room. Larry closed his eyes and began the long journey toward accepting his new reality. Chapter 6. The New Normal. 6 months after the attack, Larry stood in his garage, staring at his sea kayak. The bright yellow hull gleamed under the fluorescent lights, unmarked and ready for adventure. But the man who had once dreamed of paddling distant shores was gone, replaced by someone who jumped at the sound of water running in the bathroom. His left arm hung at his side, a network of scars crisscrossing from wrist to shoulder. The latest surgery had restored some function, but his grip remained weak and his range of motion limited. Simple tasks like buttoning a shirt or tying shoes had become exercises in frustration. "You should sell it," Margaret said quietly from the doorway. She had been watching him stand there for 20 minutes, lost in thought. "Maybe," Larry replied, though they both knew he wasn't ready. The physical therapy sessions were brutal. 3 times a week, Larry worked with a specialist who pushed him to regain whatever function possible. The progress was slow and often painful, but it was progress. "Your determination is remarkable," his therapist, Dr. Patricia Williams, told him during a particularly difficult session. "Most patients with this level of nerve damage don't push themselves this hard." But Larry knew something Dr. Williams didn't. He wasn't just fighting to use his arm again. He was fighting to find himself again, to discover who he was when the ocean was no longer his escape. The psychological recovery proved even more challenging than the physical rehabilitation. Larry had always defined himself through adventure, through his ability to push boundaries and explore wild places. Without that identity, he felt lost, diminished, afraid of his own shadow. The nightmares had been frequent at first. Larry would wake up screaming, feeling phantom teeth crushing his arm, tasting salt water in his mouth. Margaret would hold him until the shaking stopped, whispering reassurances that they were safe, that he was home. "It's just a dream," she would say, stroking his hair as he struggled to separate memory from nightmare. "You're here. With me. You're safe." But safety felt like a cage to someone who had once embraced risk as a way of life. Larry found himself avoiding anything that reminded him of the ocean. He canceled his subscription to outdoor magazines, stopped watching nature documentaries, and even avoided the swimming pool at the community center. Gradually, the nightmares became less frequent, but they never disappeared entirely. Neither did the anxiety that struck whenever he saw ocean documentaries or heard students talking about their beach vacations. His body would tense, his breathing would become shallow, and he would need to excuse himself until the panic passed. Larry had returned to teaching in January, 5 months after the attack. His students were initially fascinated by his scars, asking inappropriate questions about the attack until his obvious discomfort taught them to focus on mathematics instead. "Mr. Reyns used to be fun," he overheard one student say to another during lunch. "Now he's just different." The comment stung because it was true. The man who had once regaled his classes with stories of mountain climbing and whitewater rafting now taught with mechanical precision, avoiding any mention of outdoor adventures. His classroom walls, once covered with photos from his expeditions, now displayed only mathematical formulas and academic motivational posters. His relationship with Margaret had deepened in some ways and strained in others. She had become his caregiver, helping him with tasks that required 2 functional hands, monitoring his mood for signs of depression, and walking on eggshells around topics that might trigger his anxiety. The role didn't suit either of them, but they adapted because they had to. Margaret had always been the practical one, the planner, the one who worried about safety. Now she found herself in the position of encouraging Larry to take small risks, to push himself beyond the narrow confines of his fear. "I miss him," Margaret confided to her sister during a phone call she thought Larry couldn't hear from his position in the garage. "Not just the man he was before the accident. I miss the man he was before he became afraid of everything." The fear was the hardest part to accept. Larry had always been someone who embraced risk, who found meaning in pushing boundaries and testing himself against nature. Now he drove exactly the speed limit, double-checked door locks multiple times each night, and avoided any activity that might result in injury. His world had shrunk from the vast expanses of wilderness he once explored to the safe, predictable confines of home and school. Even grocery shopping felt overwhelming, with too many variables, too many opportunities for something to go wrong. His brother visited that spring, hoping to coax Larry back into the outdoors. "There's a great hiking trail just outside town," he suggested over dinner. "Nothing dangerous, just a nice walk in the woods. Might be good for you to get some fresh air." Larry declined, claiming his arm wasn't ready for the strain of hiking. But the truth was simpler and more devastating. He was terrified of being caught somewhere he couldn't quickly reach help, somewhere his damaged arm might leave him vulnerable. The compensation from his insurance company was generous, enough to cover the medical bills and provide some financial cushion. The settlement from the state, which had failed to post adequate shark warnings in the area, added to their security. But money couldn't purchase what Larry had lost, his sense of himself as someone who lived boldly. Financial security did little to address the deeper loss. Larry had measured his worth by his ability to venture into wild places, to test himself against natural challenges, to return home with stories of adventure and self-discovery. Without that framework, he struggled to understand his value as a person. Late at night, alone in his garage, Larry would sometimes run his good hand along the smooth hull of his kayak. He would remember the feeling of gliding across calm water, the thrill of exploring hidden coves, the profound peace that came from being alone with the ocean. Those memories felt like they belonged to someone else now, someone braver, someone whole, someone who didn't carry the permanent reminder of what could go wrong when human ambition met natural power. The kayak remained in the garage, gathering dust, a monument to the man Larry used to be. Sometimes Margaret suggested they donate it to a local youth program, but Larry couldn't bear the thought of letting it go. It was his last connection to the person he had been, even if he could never be that person again. On his worst days, Larry wondered if surviving the attack had been worth it. The man who emerged from the water was so different from the one who had entered it that morning. Perhaps it would have been better to die as the adventurer he had always been rather than live as the fearful stranger he had become. But then Margaret would find him in the garage, lost in these dark thoughts, and gently lead him back to the house. She never said much during these moments, understanding that words couldn't heal the deeper wounds. Instead, she would simply be present, a reminder that love could survive even when courage could not. Chapter 7. Ripples. The documentary crew arrived on a foggy Thursday morning, their cameras and equipment transforming Larry's quiet street into a production zone. Margaret watched from the window as neighbors gathered to observe the spectacle, some pointing toward their house with obvious excitement. "We don't have to do this," she said to Larry, who sat at the kitchen table reviewing the questions the producers had sent in advance. "Yes, we do," he replied quietly. "If it prevents someone else from going through this, then we do." The documentary was titled, "When the Ocean Strikes Back," part of a series examining wildlife encounters that had changed lives forever. The producer, an earnest woman named Rebecca Martinez, had been pursuing Larry for months, convinced that his story needed to be told. "Mr. Reyns," she began once the cameras were rolling, "can you take us back to that morning in August? What were you thinking as you pushed off from shore?" Larry's scarred arm rested on the table, visible to the camera. He had initially wanted to hide it, but Margaret had convinced him that honesty required showing the full cost of his encounter. "I was thinking about how perfect everything was," he said, his voice steady despite the tremor in his hands. "Clear skies, calm water, the kind of morning every kayaker dreams about. I felt like I was exactly where I was supposed to be." "Did you have any concerns about sharks?" "I knew they were there," Larry admitted, "but I also knew that attacks were rare. Statistics said I was more likely to be struck by lightning than bitten by a shark." "Statistics don't mean much when you're the one in the water." The interview continued for 2 hours, covering everything from his preparations to his recovery. Larry found himself reliving details he had tried to forget. The feeling of being lifted from the water by massive jaws, the taste of his own blood, the certainty that he was going to die. "What would you say to someone planning a similar adventure?" Rebecca asked near the end. Larry was quiet for a long moment. "I would say that the ocean doesn't care about your experience level or your preparations. It doesn't care about your dreams or your safety equipment. When you enter the water, you're accepting a risk that most people never fully understand. Do you regret going out that day?" Another pause. "I regret not listening to the warnings, not the obvious ones about weather and currents, but the subtle ones. The fisherman who mentioned seeing big stuff in the water, the unusual amount of seal activity. The ocean was trying to tell me something, and I was too excited to listen." After the crew left, Larry and Margaret sat in their quiet house, processing the experience of reliving that day for the cameras. "How do you feel?" Margaret asked. "Tired," Larry said. "But also lighter somehow. Like I've been carrying this story around for so long that sharing it actually helped." The documentary aired 3 months later, generating significant response. Larry received letters from other attack survivors, from people who had canceled ocean adventures after watching his story, from marine biologists who appreciated his balanced perspective on shark behavior. One letter particularly moved him. It came from a high school teacher in Oregon who had been planning a sea kayaking trip with her husband. "Your story saved my life," she wrote. "Not because it scared me away from the ocean, but because it taught me to respect it properly. We postponed our trip, took a safety course, and went with a guide instead of alone. We saw whales and dolphins and had the most incredible experience. Thank you for showing us that adventure and caution can coexist." Larry began speaking at outdoor education conferences, sharing his story with guides and instructors. His message was nuanced. Respect the ocean's power, but don't let fear prevent you from experiencing its beauty. "I lost part of my arm," he would tell audiences, "but I gained something too, a deeper understanding of my place in the natural world. The ocean isn't our playground or our enemy. It's a wild space that demands respect." His relationship with water slowly evolved. He started with supervised swimming in a community pool, his therapist helping him rebuild confidence in the water. The chlorinated environment felt nothing like the ocean, but it was a start. 2 years after the attack, Larry stood on a beach in California, watching surfers ride waves in the distance. Margaret held his good hand as they walked along the shore. "Do you miss it?" she asked. Larry considered the question. "I miss the person I was when I did it," he said finally, "but I'm learning to value the person I've become because of it." The ocean stretched endlessly before them, beautiful and terrible, peaceful and violent. Larry no longer saw it as his domain to conquer or explore. He saw it as a reminder of the thin line between confidence and hubris, between adventure and recklessness. His story had become a cautionary tale, but also something more. It was a testament to the human capacity to survive, to adapt, and to find meaning in the most difficult circumstances. As they walked back to their car, Larry didn't look back at the waves. He didn't need to. The ocean had already given him everything it was going to give him: a story, a scar, and a hard-won wisdom about the price of adventure. Behind them, the waves continued their eternal rhythm, indifferent to human drama, beautiful and dangerous as ever. You're watching Animal Ambush and Encounters, where we explore the moments when nature reminds us who's really in charge. If this story moved you, please like, share, and subscribe. Let's keep the conversation going about respecting the wild world we share.